Hello and welcome to another video. This is the fourth episode of the story in which Kakashi is given custody of Naruto. But indefinite babysitting was not something Kakashi wanted to do with his life. This story is from Twin Trouble. Please make sure to support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Time to start the show. 8-year-old Naruto sighed heavily and leant back in his chair, staring at the ceiling while all around him, his classmates frantically scribbled down notes from the board. On his left, Kiba was making entertaining moaning noises, like he was being slowly tortured to death as he wrote messily in his new puppy, Akamaru, snored, fast asleep on his desk. Naruto. Have you gotten this down? Naruto jerked violently at the accusing shout from his teacher and slowly brought his gaze down to meet the Chunin's gaze. Irika-sensei, it's boring, he whined. I already know this stuff. The tan Chunin raised a dark eyebrow. Oh, so you'll be happy to demonstrate a perfect bunshin for the class, then? A light flush dusted Naruto's cheeks. He couldn't do this jutsu, and the feeling was one he wasn't used to. He didn't like it, not at all. There's a difference between theory and reality, he said reluctantly. I know the theory, you've already taught it to us. He winced as the short-tempered teacher twitched, and braced himself for, if you can't do it, then be quiet and learn. The only reason you find this jutsu so difficult is because you try to rush in and do it without fully understanding what it is you are attempting. Now be quiet and copy this down. Naruto nodded meekly and sank down into his chair. Yes, sensei, sorry, sensei, he said. He waited until Irika had turned back to the board before slumping over his desk and rolling his eyes at Kiba. Ah, the ever-famous Irika-sensei blow up. Lesson isn't complete without it, he drawled quietly. On his right, Shikamaru sighed loudly. Does he have to shout? He asked lazily, also laying his head on the desk. Man, school is such a drag. For once, I agree with you, Shika buddy, Kiba grinned. He put a sympathetic hand on Naruto's shoulder. Don't worry, kid, you'll get it. This jutsu's a hard one. Naruto wrinkled his nose. It's E-ranked, he whined. Then annoyance flitted across his face. And you don't need to baby me, he informed the 10-year-old crossly. I may be younger than you, but there's a reason I'm in this class. I'm not 5 years old anymore. Kiba, of course, took no notice and just grinned in an infuriatingly knowing way. Reaching around Shikamaru, the Nara's best friend Akamichi Chuji shook his bag of crisps at the blonde. Don't mind him, the brunette said, mouth full. Want a chip? The scowl slid off Naruto's face like water off a duck's back as he took a handful of the salty, fatty items his father never let him eat. There were some perks to being the baby of the group, after all. He was the only one Chuji would let eat his food. All four friends ducked as a piece of chalk flew to the back row where they were sitting and clinked off the wall behind them. Pay attention back there. At that exact moment, there was a pop and a small cloud of smoke. A man dressed in a shinobi uniform appeared behind Naruto and grabbed his collar, hoisting him aloft and ignoring the blonde's squawk. Yo! I'm stealing Naruto. See you. Wait, Hataki-san. Irika shouted instantly. You can't take him now, we're practicing the Bunshin no Jutsu, and Naruto's struggling with it, so he really can't afford to dash. It was no use. With another cloud of soft white smoke, the man and boy disappeared, leaving Kiba sneezing and glaring at the spot his friend had, until recently, been sitting. Irika sighed. I hate that man, he muttered. Most of the class nodded in agreement. Several blocks away, Naruto grinned up at his tall, silver-haired kidnapper. Cool. Perfect timing, Dad. Legend, he grinned, quickly stuffing the chips in his hand into his mouth and wiping the grease off on his pants. Kakashi rolled a single eye, then smiled. How you been, pup? He asked, putting an arm around Naruto's shoulders and tugging him close with rough affection. Good. Naruto swallowed painfully and continued, grinning broadly, "I've been pretty much the same. What was your mission like? Was it awesome? Did ya beat up lots of bad guys? Did you save anyone? Did you get hurt? When did you get home?" "Earlier today," Kakashi said tolerantly. "I've been cleared for leave for this next week or so, and I thought you and I could go on another one of our little adventures." Naruto's entire face lit up at the prospect. Every now and again since he'd begun the academy, Kakashi had taken to grabbing him and just leaving. The Hokage approved these trips, partly because it offered valuable father-slash-son bonding time, partly because it gave Kakashi a perfect opportunity to expose Naruto to life outside the village in a safe way and teach him some useful skills, and partly because it got angry academy teachers off his back whenever the youngest Hokage got bored and experimented. Kakashi would take his son around the countryside, stopping at random locations, though they had yet to actually cross the border. Kakashi supposed he'd leave that excitement for after Naruto graduated. "Yeah," the boy cheered instantly, half-tackling his father. "Awesome. Where are we going?" "Quiet." Kakashi barked, smirking as Naruto instantly snapped his mouth shut. "First, we're going home to get our bags, and then we're going south." Kakashi sighed and looked longingly towards the steam rising off the baths that were just there behind that wooden fence. He was tired, muddy, sore all over and was struggling under the weight of the paternal code of honor that dictated that he swallow down all of his discomfort and keep smiling. It was early evening in the quiet little bath town that Kakashi had selected as a base of operations for at least the first part of this little trip. Naruto was still going strong, showing no signs of tiring as he turned cartwheels in the little garden they'd spent most of today. Kakashi looked around carefully, making sure there was no one in or around the pretty little place. There wasn't. The woman who ran this little resort had even closed the wooden doors leading from the pavilion adjacent into the garden itself. Probably because she had received complaints about the noise a rambunctious little boy could make, Kakashi thought guiltily. In any event, they were alone. With a noise of relief, he tugged the smothering mask down off his face and unzipped his shinobi vest, dumping the green piece of clothing on the grass next to a flowering cherry blossom tree. He dropped his hitayate on top of it and rubbed a hand through his gray hair to try and dispel a bit of his headache. Naruto had, it seemed, tired of his cartwheeling stint and had turned back to serious matters, which was the stern study of the E-ranked jutsu Bunshin. Apparently the skies would fall and the seas would boil and Naruto would die if he didn't learn it right now, and Kakashi had accordingly spent all day trying to teach the boy it. Frankly, he didn't understand why the kid was having so much trouble with it. He had no problem with the bigger, stronger or more difficult jutsu Kakashi had taught him, and the fact that a simple Bunshin was Naruto's undoing was baffling to the jounin. "Okay," the adult said, still carting fingers through his hair, "let's try again." "I just can't do it." Naruto whined, sounding perilously close to tears. Kakashi smiled a little, trying to be reassuring even as he settled cross-legged on the ground. "Some things are harder than others, pup," he said. "Even I have trouble learning certain things. Some jutsu I never quite get the hang of." "Yeah, right," his peevish son shot back. "Yeah, right," Kakashi agreed, his tone a polar opposite to the one Naruto had used. The blonde pouted, unconvinced. "Like what?" he demanded sulkily. "Rasengan," Kakashi thought. "Kawarimi," Kakashi lied. Naruto scowled at him. "You're a liar, Dad. I've seen you Kawarimi 100 times. Kakashi grinned unrepentantly. Okay, you got me. But I'm not kidding when I say I've wept frustrated tears over not being able to complete a dozen super cool jutsu." Naruto seemed to have read the truth in his father's voice, and plunked onto the grass in front of him. "Like what?" he asked again. Kakashi shook his head. No. You're not learning about any of them until you're old enough to drink." Naruto gave him a cheeky grin. You do realize that if you teach me this super hard stuff when I'm old enough to drink, you're teaching me super hard stuff when I'm old enough to try them drunk, right? He asked. Kakashi considered. You're right. I'm never telling you. What? No, Dad, that's not fair, the child complained. Kakashi laughed and ruffled wild blonde hair. Sorry, kiddo. Naruto jumped at him then, hollering something or another, and Kakashi let himself be tackled. For a while, they rolled and tumbled and played a rough game only understood by boys and puppies, adding more aches to Kakashi's body and sting to his headache and mud to his clothes. The father found he didn't mind so terribly as he listened to Naruto's unchecked giggling as he was hoisted over his father's shoulder in a fireman's hold. Kakashi ambled a few swaying steps, tossing his son back and forth with the motion, before dumping him on his head on the ground. The blonde was up and attacking again in a heartbeat, so fast in fact that Kakashi wondered, not for the first time, if the kid was part bouncy ball. Perhaps Minato-sensei had sealed a bouncy demon into the kid instead of a. Kakashi froze. Kyuubi. One thing that Kakashi hadn't considered in his entire career as Naruto's guardian was the effect the demon would have on the boy. In truth, he rarely thought about Kyuubi these days, rarely remembered that this whole relationship, his whole world, was a facade, a lie, a mission. Setting aside the sour taste that filled his mouth at the thought of his sons, of Naruto's inevitable reaction to the discovery of the truth, he focused on the consideration of the demon. Surely it would have some effect on Naruto, sooner or later it was going to rear its ugly head and Kakashi would have some explaining to do. But this was too soon, too early, Naruto was too young to tell him the truth about his heritage. It would destroy the child, destroy me, too. Again, Kakashi shook away his thoughts before they led somewhere dangerous, somewhere he hadn't visited in years. Carefully compartmentalizing his thinking, he focused on the matter of Kyuubi and his son. Naruto, try to make a bunshin again, he ordered. Naruto deflated. I can't, Daddy. Kakashi put an arm around the 8-year-old and gave him a rough squeeze. Just try for me, okay? I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to help you. Naruto sighed, exasperation in his entire body, but got to his feet and put his hands together in front of him. He quickly ran through practiced seals to make a bunshin, and Kakashi opened his Sharingan eye to watch carefully. He felt a horrible jolt in his stomach region as Naruto focused his chakra and his body lit up with the energy, a red ball lighting up and roiling angrily in the boy's stomach. Kyuubi. Bunshin. Naruto called, and his chakra surged to fuel the jutsu. For a moment, Kakashi was afraid that the squirming red energy would break from that condensed spot and rage through the little boy's system, but it didn't, staying firmly where it had been put. The problem wasn't Kyuubi, then. So what was the problem? Naruto's hand seals had been perfect for years now, and he could summon up his chakra easily enough. There was no reason why he shouldn't be creating bunshin as easy as breathing. It's hopeless, Naruto complained, shoulders slumping in defeat. Kakashi frowned, moving to kneel before his son to get a better look. Try again. Dad. Just trust me, Naruto. Please. Naruto grumbled, but consented to once more go through the motions of creating a clone. Kakashi watched carefully, this time ignoring the red chakra of a demon and focusing on the blue chakra of his son. It ran wild through the small body, through unusually large checkpoints, a wild river where most people had gentle streams. Wait. Blue. Naruto's chakra was blue. Blue, like a normal, average, everyday shinobi. He wasn't Kakashi's son by birth. Of course he hadn't inherited his father's white chakra. Kakashi barely bit back the urge to slap himself on the forehead and groan at his own idiocy. White chakra, the Hatake Kekei Genkai, was not as flashy as the Mokuton, or as well advertised as the Sharingan, and indeed there were a large number of people who would argue that it wasn't a true Kekii Genkai at all any more than brown eyes or long fingers or large chakra banks were, but it was useful to a fault anyway. White chakra was essentially highly condensed energy, twice or 3 times as dense as the regular stuff. In essence, a measure of white chakra could go twice or 3 times as far as the same amount of regular or blue chakra. Kakashi knew this. He also knew that Naruto had blue chakra. Yet he'd taught the boy the same lessons he himself had learnt as a child, lessons that should be out of reach of a normal child simply because of the chakra requirements, but Naruto had shown no ill effects. And Kyuubi wasn't affecting Naruto's chakra system, yet. Still nothing. Again. But again. Naruto looked taken aback at the sharp tone. He pouted but ducked his head and obeyed. Kakashi watched, closing his own eye and looking through Obito's. Again, he watched the boy's chakra surge, again he watched it die down. He growled in frustration. "Okay, new plan," he said, not even pausing to acknowledge Naruto's remorseful expression, much less offer comfort. "I want you to focus your chakra for me, okay? Just focus it like you're about to do a jutsu, but don't actually do anything, okay?" Naruto frowned at his dad, not liking his suddenly demanding and impatient manner. Dad never got like this. Instead of arguing, though, he placed his hand before him in the ram seal and focused his chakra like he'd been told. Kakashi once again looked him over. Now that it wasn't surging and dropping quite as erratically, he could have a good look. It didn't take long before he realized exactly what the problem was. Shit. For a few moments, that was all Kakashi could see. Shit, shit, shit. Double wow. That's big. He looked again, just to be sure. He had to have inherited that from Kushina. Even Sensei never had that much. Whoa. Naruto was teeming with chakra. Twice, no 4 times, maybe even 8, 10, 20 times Kakashi's own capacity. Already. The boy was 8. That explained a lot. Dad? Dad, are you okay? Naruto broke concentration to ask his father, who'd paled suddenly and gone very, very still. Dad? He reached out to touch the man's shoulder, and Kakashi blinked, coming back to himself with a thump. Okay, what to tell him? After a moment of wildly spinning thoughts, Kakashi had gathered himself, assimilated the new knowledge and thought of an explanation to feed his son and the world in general. He smiled and drew to his feet, placing a hand on Naruto's head to ruffle his hair affectionately. I see the problem, he said brightly. Naruto looked partly hopeful, partly full of dread. Yes, he said with trepidation. Kakashi smiled more. Your control is not the best, he fibbed. In fact, Naruto's control had to be much better, proportionally, than most in order to even vaguely direct the ocean of chakra he had within him. Naruto's blue eyes darkened. But, how can I? I don't know. I'm not putting enough into it, he guessed. Kakashi laughed a little. The opposite, kid, he said brightly. You're putting way too much into your clones. Naruto's frown looked like a pout on his young face. But I'm using a tiny bit, like you taught me for Henge and Kawarimi. Kakashi nodded. Yes, but with those, a little extra juice doesn't really affect too much, he said lightly. A bunshin, you can overload. You're cooking them, Naru. Why? The question was plaintive and full of a desperate need to know. Kakashi felt a twinge of guilt for the lie he was about to spin, but pushed it aside easily. White chakra, kiddo. What can you tell me about it? Naruto looked surprised at the sudden topic change but replied anyway. The Hataki Kekii Genkai? Dense chakra, goes further than regular stuff, you use it to power your cool stuff when other people can't, 'cause it would totally drain them. He trailed off, looking hopefully at the adult to see if that was enough. Kakashi took pity. "You're my son. You have my chakra. A good-sized reservoir, at that. To use it, you need a great deal of control. You don't have quite the level of control needed to give out so little chakra." Internally, Kakashi cringed at the lie in a way no seasoned shinobi ever should. He comforted himself with the thought that his story wasn't completely bull. Some parts were truth, or almost truth, at least. "Can you teach me?" Naruto was asking hopefully. "To have better control?" Kakashi shook his head. "No, kid. That's something that can't be taught. You might improve it a bit with practice, but I doubt you could increase it so drastically. Don't worry, you won't need anything so fine-tuned outside of the academy, unless you want to be a medic. Which you don't, last time I checked." Naruto's face screwed up in dismay. "But I'm in the academy," he half-wailed. "And I won't graduate until I know this stupid jutsu. And if I don't get it soon, Iruka-sensei will put me back in Akemi-sensei's class with the babies." Kakashi fought valiantly to keep his straight face. He was a shinobi, damn it. He should be able to keep himself from laughing at the troubles in his son's life. "Don't worry," he said, before the kid could work himself into hysteria. "I'll teach you something better. If you don't tell anyone, Iruka-sensei won't know the difference." Naruto's eyes lit up. "Really, Dad?" he gushed. "I love you." Kakashi smiled again. "I know," he said lightly. "Now, have you ever heard of a jutsu called Kagebunshin?" It was 11:30 at night. It had been a very long day. Naruto had, finally, agreed to go to bed, having been too intent on learning the Kagebunshin jutsu to rest until his father had literally threatened hellfire raining down upon the boy should he continue to disobey the adult's commands for him to brush his teeth and change into his pajamas. Eventually, 3 pajama-clad Narutos, chattering excitedly, had jumped on the bed and started bouncing. Kakashi, losing patience, had come up behind them and hit them one by one on the head. 2 vanished, 1 said, "Ow." Kakashi fingered his kunai pouch and longingly thought of the sedative powder that he could use so easily, but that wouldn't be right. "A pox on you, morals. Go to sleep," he growled through gritted teeth. Naruto didn't even seem to hear. "This is so cool, I can do it, did ya see, and now just wait until I get home. Iruka-sensei is gonna be like, 'Show me a bunshin,' and I'm gonna be like, waiting in line, and we'll get to my turn and he'll be all like, 'Okay, Naruto, give it your best go,' and I'll be like, 'Kagebunshin,' and poof. And then there'll be a million clones and sensei will dash Naruto." The shout got through to the excited blonde, and he finally fell silent. Kakashi took a deep breath to calm himself down, mentally pulling up stored images of how angelic and cute Naruto really was, underneath this bratish disobedience so late at night. Keeping the picture of Angel Naruto firmly in his mind, he exhaled and spoke in a level voice. "I have asked you countless times to go to bed, Naruto. I am getting very tired of your behavior tonight. I know you're excited, and you've done well to learn the jutsu so quickly, but now it is time for sleep. It is he glanced at his watch, 4 hours past your bedtime. Now, I am going to give you 2 minutes, 120 seconds, to get a glass of water, go to the bathroom, do anything else you need to do before bed, and get under the covers. Go on." Naruto skittered off the bed like he'd been burned, and Kakashi took the moment without his child to lean against the wall of the hired hotel room they were staying in and wondered if he was ever going to get to sleep tonight. He'd barely had time to form the thought when the blonde came racing back out of the adjacent bathroom with a glass of water he'd filled from the sink tap in there. Setting the glass on the bedside table, he slid into bed and threw the covers over himself, then looked at his father to see if the adult was still mad. Kakashi sighed. "Sleep well, son," he said, kissing the boy lightly on the forehead. "I'll see you in the morning." Night, Dad, Naruto whispered back as if afraid to speak aloud for fear of starting his excited babble again. Kakashi, recognizing that his son was nowhere near ready to sleep, sighed heavily and sat on the edge of the bed, tugging Naruto's shoulder to get the boy to roll over onto his stomach. When the 8-year-old was settled, he pulled the covers down and placed a hand on Naruto's back, rubbing gently. "Well done today, Naru," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you." The boy fairly thrummed with excitement at the words, so Kakashi quickly changed track. "Would you like me to tell you a story? When I was about your age, you know that I was on a Genin Chunin squad, remember? Minato-sensei was trying to teach us a water jutsu good for filling empty dams and wells, important in war times, you see. My teammate Obito." He quickly wove the tale, shamelessly preying on the fact that his son adored being told stories, idolized the yondaime, thrilled at war tales and always settled down to listen when Kakashi began one. Coupled with the soothing petting and the way Kakashi cleverly made the tale more boring towards the end, less gripping once Naruto had begun to realize how tired he was, and it wasn't long before he was talking to a soundly sleeping child. Finally, just as the clock was chirping midnight, Naruto was bedded down for the night. With the evening's nth sigh, the adult stood up and wandered around the room a little, before just falling into bed himself. Well. Fancy meeting you here, kid." Kakashi closed his eye. "Crap. Hello, Jiraiya," he said resignedly. The large man was seated on the grass facing the large wooden fence marking the edge of the women's bath. More importantly, it was the edge of the spa's property, too, so as long as he kept from leaning on the fence, the staff could not tell him to move along. Jiraiya knew all the tricks of his trade. "So, brat," he said, leaning back and tucking his pencil into his long ponytailed hair. "Come to realize the wisdom of my counsel, have you?" Kakashi sighed. "I'm not here to spy on women," he said flatly. Jiraiya seemed to weigh his truthfulness for a moment before scoffing in disgust. "You know, if it weren't for that kid of yours, brat, I'd say you were gay. Actually." Again, the man seemed to weigh him, if somewhat mockingly. Kakashi glared. "Goodbye, Jiraiya." Adjusting his grip on the groceries he'd bought, he stalked on his way. "Hey, wait, kid, I was just teasing." Naruto's godfather labored to his feet and caught up with the offended Hokage in 3 long strides. "Man, some people have no sense of humor. I haven't tried to get you yet, have I?" Kakashi remarked dryly without stopping. The man chuckled. "So, why are you here?" he pressed, peeking at the bag in the shinobi's arm, "with groceries you would never buy to restock mid-mission. I mean, animal-shaped crackers? Really?" Kakashi snatched the packet back. "You have to feed kids something," he snapped. "Crackers make a good snack for hungry children. Animal-shaped because, despite what people grumble drunkenly about me in pubs, I am not altogether intent on leeching everything fun from the world." Jiraiya's eyes lit up. "Naruto," he said eagerly. "You have Naruto with you?" Kakashi surveyed him sourly. "What do you care?" The Sannin looked taken aback, so Naruto's father added a surly, "Yeah, he's here. Now stop following me." "Not a chance, brat." And just like that, Kakashi found his son's godfather stuck on his 6 as he made his way back to the room where he had left a still sleeping Naruto, though he would be very surprised if the boy was still asleep, no matter how late he'd been up last night. "He probably won't recognize you," the Hokage commented over his shoulder in a warning of sorts. "It's been a long time since your last visit, and he was very young back then." He didn't look back, so he didn't see Jiraiya's partially guilty, partially worried wince. Soon they arrived at the hired room, and Kakashi fiddled with his luggage until he had a hand spare to unlock the door and push it open. Naruto was sitting on the floor inside, attempting to assemble a puzzle that he'd clearly found somewhere in the room. Blue eyes looked up when the adults entered, each waiting with bated breath to see the boy's reaction. "Erojiji?" Naruto's tone was shocked. Jiraiya had just enough time to shoot a triumphant look in Kakashi's direction before the blonde boy continued, "I thought you were dead." That stopped the big man short. "Dead?" he repeated. "Why did you think I was? Did your father tell you that?" Naruto snorted, as if the notion was ridiculous. "Dad doesn't talk about you," he said dismissively. "But you haven't visited since I was, what, 4? I figured you were dead." "I'm sorry," Jiraiya said sincerely. "My work doesn't let me get back home to Konoha much, or I would have visited more." Naruto shrugged, eyes fixed on the bag Kakashi was holding, whatever fleeting interest he'd had in the conversation lost. Hey, Dad, what did you get? Can I see? Kakashi held the bag out of reach, but dipped a hand into it and drew out the packet of animal crackers that the Sannin had ridiculed a few minutes before, tossing it in the child's direction. "Awesome. Thanks, Dad." Kakashi sent Jiraiya a look that said, "Told you so." Jiraiya grinned. "Hey, kid, what did you say to coming to hang out with me today?" The father made a convulsive move and a noise of protest, but Naruto, while not exactly lighting up like a beaming beacon, certainly looked partial to the idea. "Yeah, okay. Can I, Dad?" Kakashi sighed and, against his better judgment, folded. "You have 2 hours," he said to the boy's godfather. A minute or two later, both eldest and youngest male were gone. Jiraiya smiled at the kid. Quite suddenly, an expression of horror passed over the clone's face and it disappeared with a flash of smoke, followed by every Naruto in sight. The Sannin had just enough time to let a bad feeling grow ominously in his stomach. Before his sharp ears located the sound of tears. A bystander would have been flatly amazed at how fast the large, older-looking gentleman had managed to move in that instant, and Jiraiya was kneeling by a collapsed, sodden Naruto in less than a second, trying to pry the small hands away from where they were up to protect or hide the child's face. "Naruto! Naruto, what happened? Where are you hurt?" With his insistent urging, Naruto inched his hands down his face, revealing first eyes streaming with pain, tears that made his godfather's heart lurch before drawing below his chin and allowing the adult to see the blood trickling from his mouth with a steady flow. Jiraiya thought he was going to be sick. Naruto's lips moved, and sound garbled by the injury came out while a blood-smudged hand indicated off to his left. Jiraiya had no hope of deciphering any of these by itself, but together they made enough of speech for him to understand, and he followed the boy's gesturing to spy a mossy log set across the pretty, serene little creek that Naruto had slumped on the bank of. It was right next to a picturesque footbridge, complete with ornamental handrails. "You were trying to walk over the log," the big man guessed, hating the fresh tears that slid down his godson's cheeks, over a bruise that was already blackening. "It was too slippery, and you fell and hit your face on the railing." Naruto nodded, trying to put up hands to nurse his sore face again, but Jiraiya caught his hands in one large one and used the other to gently search for the injury that was bleeding, ignoring Naruto's flinches and whimpering. "Open your mouth up, Naru," he commanded gently. Naruto obeyed, and something white and small tumbled through his lips and into his lap. The adult froze. "Shit," he said aloud. "Your dad's gonna kill me." He composed himself, turning back to the hurt 8-year-old. "Okay, it's okay, Naruto," he soothed. "You knocked a tooth loose is all. Have you ever lost a tooth before? It's just a baby tooth, it will grow back." Naruto nodded. He'd lost his first tooth at the tender age of 4 and 8 months, and was an old hand at the process by now. The tears stung his eyes, and he wished he'd stop being a baby, but this hurt. He sniffed, desperately wanting his father, wanting anyone who would hug him and tell him everything was all right. He yelped in surprise when his godfather gathered him in one sweep of massive arms and pressed him close to a broad chest, hugging him tightly but gingerly. "It's okay, kid," the Sannin grunted, petting golden hair. "You're all right. Let's go rinse your mouth out, you'll be fine." They did just that, Jiraiya carefully helping Naruto to rinse the blood out of his mouth with water from the Sannin's water bottle, and giving the boy some paracetamol and ibuprofen, 2 garden-variety painkillers that would be more than sufficient to deal with Naruto's missing tooth. Kakashi smelt it before he saw it. He was reclining in one of the spa's many baths, struggling against the twin feelings of anxiety and relief over the fact that Jiraiya was watching over his child. He's a Sannin, the Hokage though to himself. He practically raised sensei, he can handle one 8-year-old for a few hours. Blast, I'm not supposed to be glad to be rid of the child for a couple of hours, I'm an awful parent. The self-flagellation was brought to an appropriate halt when Kakashi's sharp nose caught a familiar coppery smell that was an old friend to those in the shinobi profession. Blood. An instant later, his son came into the steamy enclosure, and Kakashi went cold when he saw the tear tracks on his young face, the long-dried crimson substance clinging stubbornly to his features and neck. "What happened?" he demanded, sloshing water as he moved to the side of the pool. He would have climbed out, but Naruto was already there and grinning as he splashed the bathwater. "Naruto, where are you hurt? What happened? Tell me." Naruto opened his mouth with a distinctly proud tilt to his head, a finger highlighting a gap that Kakashi couldn't remember being there that morning. "I lost a tooth," the boy announced. "I slipped and knocked it right out, see?" Again, the father was treated to the sight of the inside of the child's mouth. Slowly, allowing himself time to process, Kakashi turned his gaze to a sheepish and apprehensive Jiraiya, standing on the edge of the pool. Naruto stopped fingering the new gap by his mouth as the tension built and looked between the adults staring one another down. After a long moment, he spoke up, putting a hand on his father's water-slick arm and saying, "Dad? It was an accident. Promise me you won't fight with Arojiji? It wasn't his fault. Honest." Kakashi glanced at his child, then looked back at the other man. He was angry, but it was a cold anger. "I won't hurt him, or try to, Naruto," he said evenly, keeping eye contact with Jiraiya. "But your godfather is never, ever looking after you again. Ever." Jiraiya winced, but supposed he'd gotten off lightly, all things considered. He'd try to talk the Hokage around later, when the man had been given a chance to cool off. Maybe in a year or so. Kakashi, meanwhile, dismissed the Sannin and turned to fussing over his child, carefully helping the little blonde erase the signs of the trauma. With any luck, the legendary pain in Kakashi's neck would leave soon, and he and his son would be back to their play. Little Miss Haruno Sakura was getting dressed. She frowned at the mirror, trying to find the best way to arrange the pretty green ribbon to keep her hair up in such a way that didn't accent her overlarge forehead. Mummy was forever telling her that she was beautiful and not to worry, but mothers had to do that. Besides, she had to impress Sasuke-kun. It was important. The 10-year-old made some final adjustments to her hairstyle and slipped into pale pink sandals, and was ready. "Bye, Mom," she called as she ran down the stairs, grabbing up her pink backpack and racing for the door. "Sakura." Mummy called after her, "Wait a moment. You haven't eaten any breakfast, dear." Sakura hesitated, sneaking back into the kitchen and sniffing the wonderful smell of pancakes and bacon. It smelled wonderful, but it looked greasy and fatty and full of stuff that couldn't be good for her. And Ino Pig had been making nasty comments about how much she weighed lately. She'd never make Sasuke-kun like her if she pigged out on food like that. "No, thanks, Mom," she smiled. "I'll grab an apple, but I'm late, so I'd better go. See you." Snatching up a green apple from the bowl on the counter, the little girl raced for the door again, pretending not to hear her mother calling after her. Left behind, Haruno-san shook her head at the departed child. "Late," the woman said incredulously, looking at the clock. "School doesn't start for another 2 hours." Outside, Sakura slowed to a walk and bit contemplatively into her apple as she shrugged her backpack better onto her back. Konoha was already bustling despite the early hour, a side effect of having a 2-to-1 shinobi to civilian ratio. She could head to school, or to a training ground for a while, or the park, or just hang around the village for a while. Deciding that it was too early to train and she didn't want to mess up her hair anyway, the park was for babies and the village this early tended to be filled with overly busy people who shouted when she got in their way. Sakura decided to head to school, where she could lose herself in study and impress Iruka-sensei with her dedication. It was very early, there was only one other student there, swinging quietly on the swing in the yard. Sakura waved vaguely to the small boy and continued on into the school, pleased to find the doors unlocked as if just for her. She busily stowed her bag in her locker and pulled out the books she wanted to study. She thought she'd focus on the shinobi laws today. There were so many of them, and she had to know every one in an instant if asked. Ah! A cry of alarm made her jump. Sakura looked around, the hallway was empty, but the cry had come from the classroom. It had been deep, an adult male, Iruka-sensei. Maybe he's in trouble, Sakura thought, making up her mind to go check it out. She crept forward silently, using the skills she had learnt in this building with pride as she went to the rescue of her teacher. Reaching the classroom, she peeked in through a crack in the door. It's no use, Iruka was saying, arms crossed defensively over his chest. He had his back mostly to the door, facing off against. Sakura's heart caught in her throat, a man in a brown cloak and a white porcelain mask. An ANBU. Why does an ANBU want to talk to Iruka-sensei? She wondered. The ANBU tilted his head. It's no use, Iruka-sensei repeated insistently. You can stand there until the cows come home, I can't help you. He's not here. His father took him again. The ANBU made a frustrated noise. Hataki-san is too reckless, the masked man complained. How are we to deal with these threats if the child is not here for us to protect? Iruka-sensei sighed as if hugely put upon. It's not my fault, he said. It's ridiculous, the ANBU continued as if he hadn't heard. It's completely irresponsible. You're preaching to the choir, ANBU-san, Iruka cut through the scolding firmly. But I cannot stop or help the situation. I strongly advise Hataki-san against taking his child away, but there's no reasoning with him. The ANBU huffed, even though he privately thought that the Hataki kid would probably be well enough protected under his father's watch. Well, when will he be back? He demanded. Iruka-sensei shrugged. Your guess is as good as mine, he said. He might be back tomorrow, he might not be back for another month. Behind the door, Sakura frowned. Why was an ANBU bullying Iruka-sensei about Hataki Naruto? The kid was out of school as often as he was in it, but that wasn't Iruka-sensei's fault. And why would it be important enough for an ANBU to be involved? The ANBU shook his head. Well, consider yourself notified, anyway, he said. And keep a close watch on the Uchiha for a while, he's a risk as well. Until we can find and neutralize the threat, I'd advise having eyes on him at all times. Iruka nodded, having eyes was a military way of saying always have a clear view of him. When the little Hataki gets back, much the same. Then of course you should watch the clan heirs. The ANBU paused, and gave out the strong impression of a grin. You have one hell of a class, Iruka-sensei. Uchiha, Hyuga, Aburame. Inazuka, Hataki, Yamanaka, yes, I know, Iruka-sensei snapped, sounding even more irritable than he did when dealing with Kiba. Every clan heir, in my class. It's a security nightmare. The ANBU mask tilted toward Sakura for a moment, and she stopped breathing, suddenly terrified the elite ninja had spotted her. But then he just made a faint sound that might have been laughter and kept talking. You get no sympathy from us. But you do get a whole squad stationed around the academy for security. We've got no way of knowing who they're after. Best guesses include the Uchiha or maybe Hyuga, but there's no sense in leaving the others unprotected. The little girl never spotted the way the masked man's eyes lingered with amusement on the classroom door she was sheltering behind. Irika-sensei sighed. Fine, fine. Then his brown eyes sharpened and he looked at the ANBU with a moment of suspicion. If that's the case, why are you worried about Naruto-kun? He demanded. The ANBU shrugged. Well, it's complicated. Basically, his father is a much-liked man within the village walls, and a much-hated one without. It is possible this is a grudge-driven affair, in which case, this time, the possible candidates are him, or the Uchiha. Again, the impression of a grin radiated from the man. Isn't that just what you want to hear, Irika-sensei? Irika-sensei sighed heavily, the image of a man burdened with too much to possibly cope. To the letter, ANBU-san. I'll section off the boys if Naruto-kun comes back before you fix this. I'll get Mizuki-sensei and Akemi-sensei to look out for the clan kids when they're out of class, at break and the like, and I'll come up with something to keep Sasuke-kun close by at break. The ANBU gave a short bow. Thank you, Irika-sensei. That is all we need. With luck, this will be resolved in a few days' time. We are sorry for the inconvenience until then. Sakura felt the stirrings of panic in her chest. Something horrid was happening, something that could involve all the Shinobi clan members in her class. Something that involved Sasuke-kun. She didn't quite understand what was happening, but resolved then and there not to let her precious Sasuke-kun out of her sight from that moment on. The ANBU straightened up and glanced at the door yet again. Sakura stiffened in fear as he made a soft noise like a chuckle. Sorry for startling you, Irika-sensei, he said, referring to the girly shriek he had frightened out of the Chunin at the start of this conversation. Irika scowled at the mild amusement in the man's tone. Don't look now, but we have an audience. Might want to look to that. Irika-sensei opened his mouth to reply, possibly with a snide remark about that warning being. Half a confidential conversation too late and they both knew it, but the ANBU disappeared in a flicker of displaced air. The teacher sighed. You can come in now, Sakura, he called without looking back. The little girl crept sheepishly into the room. Now, Irika-sensei said, turning to look at her, you know you're not to talk about this, right? He took in the half-scared, half-stubborn look on his student's face and sighed again. Irika knew he had his work cut out for him explaining that these sorts of threats were fairly common and not to cause too much alarm without actually telling the unauthorized child as much. Sit down, Sakura-kun. 9-year-old Naruto bit his lip and checked his watch. Dad was late, even for Dad, and Naruto was beginning to wonder if maybe he should have gone home with Kiba after all. He glanced back at the academy, but it was dark inside, so even the teachers had probably gone home. His head throbbed a little, like it did when Tsum smacked him around the ears with a textbook during supervised homework time, and he shook it, trying to dislodge the headache. Dad hadn't mentioned anything about being away tonight, but even though at 9 years old most of his classmates could walk home by themselves, Naruto knew well enough that he was absolutely not to leave the academy until Dad showed up, unless with Kiba or a teacher, or a shinobi who told Naruto the password. So the blonde retreated to the lonely swing hung from a tree in the corner of the playground and waited. As the shadows grew longer, Naruto began to get an uncomfortable feeling in his belly to join the throbbing in his head. His dad ran perpetually about an hour late, being a shinobi in high demand, but he had never been this late for Naruto before. Other people, sure, the most memorable being that time he'd left Genma waiting on a corner for a SEC that lasted more than 24 hours, but never Naruto. What if something had gone wrong on a mission? Had he even had a mission today? Maybe. But what would Naruto do if... Niji-kun, you are lacking in youthful vigor. This is truly sad, that one so young has no knowledge of the garden and springtime of youth. Lee, we must endeavor to teach your teammate of the joys of youth and life. Naruto jumped as the swing reached its pinnacle, landing on his feet lightly, and moved to the chain-link fence. Clambering to the top of it, he looked down the road in the direction of the noise. Mato guy, preaching to a group of kids who were like 12 years old. Is that a genin team? Froggy has a genin team? Those poor kids. The blonde had to giggle when the group grew close enough that he could recognize Hyuga Niji as the boy guy was preaching to. And there was a disturbing creation right next to the green beast that looked, well, like a clone hinged small. Froggy-san, Naruto said reflexively as the group reached him, jumping down to the forbidden ground outside the boundary of the academy fence. As per his father's dire warnings, he was instantly assaulted. Do not insult the honorable Guy-sensei in that manner. Naruto stared in horror at the smaller, though still plenty big, like, 2 or 3 years older than him big, green thing that was now shouting at him, arms flailing wildly. His mouth dropped open, and the filter in his mind crashed, so words tumbled out before he'd even processed them himself. Dear Lord, it's multiplying. There was a pause as the words registered, and in the background Naruto saw Niji smirk in a way that indicated that had he been anyone but a jaded Hyuga, he would be rolling on the ground laughing right now. Guy didn't seem to notice what Naruto had said, or he was used to random sentences like that and just accepted them for part of who the son of rival Kakashi was. No, Lee, he cried. This is my good friend, the son of my most worthy adversary, to you known as Kakashi-sensei. His manner of addressing me is affectionate, dating back to a time when he was very small. Lee was now crying. Forgive me, great and noble friend of the terrific Guy-sensei, he wailed. The whole situation was surreal. It seemed to be Naruto's turn to say something, but he stalled. He said. I didn't know you had a son, Froggy, Guy-san? There was a pause. Hyuga smirked more, his shoulders actually shaking slightly from the effort of maintaining his aloof persona. No, my dear child. Guy announced to the world. I wish it were so, but Lee is not my son. He is my most excellent disciple. I am honored that you think me worthy of such a position, Guy-sensei. Lee announced right back. And you, here he turned to Naruto, who took a reflexive step backwards. I am humbled and overwhelmed with joy that you find me similar enough to my glorious teacher that you mistook me for his blessed offspring. You mean this is contagious? There it was again, his mouth just blurted out something without warning him first. The girl that Naruto had only vaguely registered until now began to giggle. Niji put a hand over his mouth and his shoulders began to twitch. Then, salvation. Guy. I see you've found my wayward puppy. Dad. In an instant, Naruto attached himself to Kakashi's waist, clinging desperately. Save me. Kakashi smiled, closing his eye happily, one hand negligently petting Naruto's blonde head. Thanks for rescuing him. I was a little late in collecting him from school today. He was no doubt worried and a little scared. Dad, Naruto whined, feeling his face flush red. Okay, so it was truth, Dad didn't have to say it. And in that blithe tone, too. As if he was some stupid little kid. The hand on his head ruffled his hair again, but otherwise Dad didn't respond. We'd better be going, then, the adult smiled. I've got a busy afternoon, and Naru still hasn't done his homework. See you later, Guy-sensei. Nice to see you again, midgets. And he tugged his son away. After a block or two walked in silence, assimilating everything that had just happened, Naruto looked up at his father. Are you sure that boy isn't his son? He asked, knowing Kakashi would know he was talking about Guy and Lee. Kakashi stalled for a moment at the nightmare that was Guy actually managing to procreate, and quickly reassured himself that even Guy couldn't do that without help, and what woman on the planet would that with that? She didn't exist. Surely not. Guy was 13 when Lee was born, he said calmly, instead of going into that with his 9-year-old. Considering his reaction when I came home with you at 17, I'm sure. Besides, if you really look at him, his face and bone structures are not that similar to Guy's. The eyebrows are the same, sure, but everything else is cosmetic. He's mimicking. Naruto shuddered. Naruto. Dinner. Kakashi waited for the standard reply of, "Coming, Dad," but heard only silence. A stab of concern flickered within him. Naruto? Here I am, Dad. At the quiet reply, Kakashi turned and saw Naruto coming in the other door, paler than normal. The markings on his cheeks stood out almost starkly, making Kakashi blink. Oh. Are you okay, Naru? You're looking a little. The blonde shrugged, sinking down to sit at the table and resting his head in his hands. I've got a headache. Feel a little off. I'm not very hungry, I must be tired. Can I just go to bed? Kakashi hesitated. In anyone else, he'd say that Naruto was coming down with something, but this was Naruto. In all his time as the kid's father, Naruto had never gotten sick, not once. Jiraiya had once told him that the Kyuubi was good for some things like that. Naruto would enjoy good health and longevity as a result of having the demon sealed within him. Which meant that either he wasn't sick, or he was very sick. Did you have a busy day at the academy? He asked carefully. Naruto shrugged, drawing shapes on the tabletop with a fingertip. Yeah, I guess. Lots of sparring. I didn't do too well. He glanced through his bangs at his father as he shared this news, almost as if afraid of the reaction. It wasn't often that he said that in relation to his schoolwork. Kakashi made sure his expression remained open and unchanged. Everyone has off days, he said casually. Even me. Don't worry too much about it, pup. Now, I want you to try to eat something. You might be tired, but some food might make you feel a little better, okay? Naruto reluctantly agreed, and Kakashi felt his worry mount higher as the blonde pushed food around his plate, barely touching it. Finally, the father released his son to bed, thinking to let him sleep it off. He trailed Naruto up the stairs, pausing outside the kid's bedroom door to let him get changed before pushing into the room. Naruto was already collapsed in bed, and Kakashi made his way over to him. Here's some water, if you need it, he said, putting a cup of it on the bedside table. Good night. He bent over and placed a kiss on Naruto's forehead, and paused for a moment. Naruto was warm. Now, admittedly, Naruto was and had always been naturally a few degrees warmer than what was normal for a human, the demon he carried causing the change, but his paternal instincts screamed at him that Naruto was a fraction warmer even than that. Later, Kakashi would hate himself for dismissing the thought as overcautious. Kumogakure was a miserable place most of the time. It was high in the air, the clouds and sheer rocky mountains it was balanced precariously within and atop, making for cold, slick, treacherous living conditions. Admittedly, sometimes the clouds cleared enough to see more than 2 feet ahead, and the sun hit the stones just right, and the village was breathtaking. It didn't happen often. This day was one of the miserable ones, and Daitaro's mood was dark to match. He was a jounin, and not one of the weak tea breed that had been cropping up ever since the Yondame's very bright idea of offering up promotions as an incentive to breed. No, Daitaro had earned his jockstraps, he was a real jounin. Get the hell back into line, he shouted at a chunin who was slightly out of formation. The man swallowed and quickly put himself into the correct place, standing at attention. In some villages, things like rank and hierarchy were less rigid and enforced, but in Kumo there was a very clear divide between ranks, and even within the ranks based on time in service. There was a pecking order in the village, everyone standing on an individual peg, outranking some and subservient to others. At that moment in time, the highest on the totem pole was, of course, the Raikage. The lowest was little Koreha Jin, the youngest of the children in the lowest form at the academy. Everyone else, students, teachers, genin, chunin, jounin, anbu, retired or otherwise, active or not, was somewhere in between. Daitaro was in the highest quarter, a rather high-ranking jounin, 14th from the Hokage, in fact. Right now, he was briefing a chunin/jounin assembly on some changes that needed to be made to the village's security, and different patrol routes and shift times that would follow on from the changes. Then he was going to chew out some idiots for some idiotic mistakes that only the most idiotic idiots would ever make. He was looking forwards to that part. With a heavy sigh, the jounin scanned the 50-odd men standing in formation. They were waiting on one last platoon of jounin, then they'd be ready to begin. To pass the time and attempt to ease the headache threatening his sanity, Daitaro dug in his pocket for a cigarette that was laced with something just a little more fun than plain old nicotine, and lit it up. The headache eased. Someone shifted the tiniest of amounts, and Daitaro sent the chunin a look that made the teenaged girl wince just a little. The jounin surveyed her dispassionately, her belly rounded and pulling her uniform out of alignment. She'd be gone soon, too large and unwieldy to be on active duty. Mind, if her back and/or feet hurt too much for her to stand at attention for 20 minutes, then she was probably already at the stage when she needed to be relieved of duty. Bloody hell, Daitaro thought darkly, quickly counting heads. That most of the full-fledged ninja in the village were assembled here before him was a frightening thought. There were so few of them, it was no wonder that the Hokage was desperate for children to be born. Still, the way the man had gone about it caused no end of strife. The workforce was cut in half. To begin with, Kunoichi had dropped out of active service to birth the brats that could be heard screaming from any part of the village at any time of day or night nowadays. With a sigh, he put his cigarette to his lips and took a long drag of it, exhaustion weighing on his mind. It was a real problem, no doubt about it. But it wasn't his problem. His problem was keeping the village running smoothly despite the lack of hands to share the load. His problem was keeping everyone working thrice as hard as normal to keep up with the Kunoichi disappearing off the active duty roster. His problem was to do his job, and he had to trust the Hokage to deal with all other problems, or assign them to someone who could. All right, shut up, he shouted, the last few stragglers finally arriving. The smattering of tiny whispers cut off. Right away, and everyone stood at attention. We're here to make some changes to our patrols, and I'm only going over this once, so you better damn well pay attention. The first shift will now be from midnight to 2 p.m. It was getting late. Kakashi was carefully doctoring a set of kunai, examining each one with a discerning eye and judging them with a standard that could only be called supercritical. These weapons belonged to his son. He would not let Naruto into any sort of danger with a weapon that had even the slightest chance of failing. He picked up the last one and examined it carefully before replacing the handle entirely. Then he began dragging a hardy file across the dulled edges of the knife, sharpening them to razors. After all this, he picked up a cloth and polished his fingerprints off the shiny metal. He paused when the polishing showed him a tiny fracture in the blade and sighed, putting it on the discard pile. Nope. Not good enough for his kid. Observing the tiny pile of kunai that he had deemed to be worthy of Naruto, he sighed again and mused that he'd need to buy some more. He'd dwindled the kid's supply down to a measly 12 kunai. The clock, Kakashi was surprised to see when he glanced at it, read 10:30 p.m. It had somehow gotten very late. The Hokage quickly packed the kunai away, laying the rejected ones aside in a basket that he'd deliver later to the blacksmith to be melted down and recycled. Then he climbed to his feet and moved to the stairs, intent on checking on Naruto. He cracked the door to his son's room open and froze, his heart skipping a beat or two in a moment of panic. The boy was shivering beneath his winter duvet, which he had clearly dragged out of the nearby closet, curled around Oink for comfort. Kakashi felt real fear jolt through him to look at his son's pale face and trembling limbs. The adult placed his bare hand on the boy's forehead and his breath caught at how high Naruto's fever had become. And so quickly. Kakashi's first thought was to reach for the first aid kit and find some anti-fever medication. He dismissed that idea out of hand, knowing that this wasn't something cough drops and tea could fix. Naruto was ill, horribly so, and he needed a doctor. The father rushed to pull on clothing appropriate for going out in, not even noticing that he was mixing civilian and shinobi apparel. He rammed his feet into his sandals and hurried back upstairs, moving into Naruto's room and attempting to tease the boy out of his blanket. Naruto whimpered, eyes cracking open. "Dad," he murmured. "Daddy, I don't feel." The boy trailed off, and Kakashi realized that this was just as new and frightening for Naruto as it was for him. The poor kid had never been sick before, he'd have no idea what was going on. "It's okay, Naruto," the adult breathed, gently easing his son into his arms, blanket, oink and all, in a bizarre mimicry of what he had done long, long ago when he was first gifted this precious bundle. Where would he take him? To whom? There was a reason that Kakashi had carefully kept Naruto away from medics and doctors. They were trained to see truths of the flesh, and it would be all too easy for one to discover, by accident, even, who Naruto truly was, what he contained. But now Kakashi had to take the risk. He had to. So who to choose? Someone with a good medical literacy, someone who didn't know Kakashi intimately enough to realize that the child wasn't a close genetic match to him, someone who would just do the job and let them leave, someone who if they did find out would probably keep the secret, someone easily silenced if it seemed they would not. Rin. The thought came as a surprise. He hadn't given his once teammate a word or thought since he'd last seen her, more than 12 years ago now. The last time they'd met had been at Obito's funeral. Kakashi, a fresh 13-year-old, had been aching physically with his injuries and numb internally from the grief and self-loathing. The Uchiha had tried to deny his right to be at the funeral, but Minato-sensei had thrown his weight around until they'd conceded to allow the teen a spot at the back of the crowd. Rin had been there, standing apart from Kakashi and refusing to meet his gaze. She hadn't spoken a word to him since that horrible mission 3 weeks beforehand when they had lost Obito. After watching an empty casket being lowered into the ground and listening to the priest speak and pray for the soul of the dead, the crowd had dispersed. Rin, face streaked with tears, had been walking away herself and had dropped her umbrella. Kakashi had bent to pick it up for her. "That broke the dam. It's all your fault." That's what she'd shouted. "I hate you. I hate you." "I know," had been Kakashi's thoughts as he stood silently and let her scream and rage at him. "Me too. Me too." Minato-sensei had tried to hush her, but Rin had been inconsolable. "It's your fault," she kept screaming, "your fault he's dead. You bastard. Why didn't you come for me? I knew you wouldn't, I knew, right from the moment they took me. You wouldn't and he did and so it's your fault he died. You were supposed to come for me, not him." Then she'd said the sentence that had sealed their estrangement, "But I guess he was an idiot, he was your friend after all." Kakashi had come very close to losing his mind that moment. Now, years later, he wasn't quite sure of the order of things, but he knew he'd screamed, he knew he'd launched himself at his teammate, he knew he'd scratched her and pulled her hair and slammed her head against the ground and shouted that he would never let her talk about Obito like that and sobbed that he wouldn't let his own faults taint Obito's memory and that if she wouldn't shut up then he would shut her up. He knew that Minato-sensei had grabbed him, pulled him off of her and tossed him to the ground before hurrying Rin away. Kakashi had remained there for a very long time, peripherally aware of the sound of the gravediggers shoveling cold, wet dirt onto the casket with the most bone-chilling sounds that existed. Later, Minato-sensei had tried several times to reconcile the two, but was met with stony resistance from both parties. Rin hated Kakashi for abandoning her. Kakashi hated her for the fact that she was more hurt by that than by Obito's death. Then Minato-sensei had died and Rin had secured a placement out of Konoha in one of the outposts on the border, and Kakashi had forgotten that she existed. Still, news like your Genin squad teammate returning home for the first time in 5 years in between rotations tended to reach relevant ears. Kakashi was aware that the woman was in town, burying herself in the hospital while she waited to be reassigned to another outpost, having served her 5-year stint at the Hirakanwa outpost and been sent back to Konoha. Word had it she'd applied to be sent to the Kishiguru outpost on the opposite side of the country, but such transfers always took at least 3 months to arrange. Whatever the reason, Rin's presence did provide a bizarre solution. As a medic, she was contractually bound to treat any Konohan citizen who required her aid to the best of her capabilities, and she knew from experience that Kakashi was a cold-hearted bastard who would take her slamming the door in his face straight to the Hokage and get her dishonorably discharged with a penalty punishment besides without hesitation or qualm. And she hadn't had any contact with Kakashi in 12 years, making her enough of a stranger to fool when it came to Naruto. She also knew and loved Minato-sensei, so if she found out the truth, chances were she'd keep quiet. She'd probably storm straight to the Hokage to complain and demand custody herself, but Kakashi was confident that he could crush her if it came down to a custody battle, be it in court or in the Hokage's office. Even if he didn't, though, she was a stranger to most of Konoha by now and her word would not be trusted over Kakashi's, and she was expected to be gone for another 5 years very shortly. She would be easy to make disappear forever. More than all of this, she was a damn good medic. Kakashi nodded to himself, mind made up, he would seek out his once teammate for assistance. Okay, Naru, hold on. I'm going to take you somewhere you can get some help, he murmured to his precious cargo, and set off at a run, careful not to jostle the child. He reached the hospital a few long minutes later and pushed inside the emergency department. I need to see Tamanaka Rin, he said to the nurse behind the reception whose job it was to direct traffic. My son is very ill. The nurse took one look at Naruto's pale face and nodded. Take a seat, I'll locate Dr. Tamanaka, she replied. Kakashi obeyed, sitting stiffly in the uncomfortable plastic chair available and rubbing his hand along Naruto's back in an effort to give comfort. The boy had fallen into a fevered doze, mostly asleep leaning against his father's chest. It felt like an age, but in reality it was probably barely 20 minutes before the door leading from the emergency room to the rest of the hospital opened and a familiar figure walked through. Kakashi looked her up and down. She was still recognizable, barely, with hardly anything of the knobbly, awkwardly proportioned 13-year-old she used to be left in her. She'd filled out well, grown much taller and received her adult proportions and physical grace. But she was still the same, still Rin, with a short brown bob cut and purple tattoos on each cheek. Kakashi stood up as the nurse who had called her here gestured in his direction. Rin followed the hand, spotted him, and froze. Well, I guess that means that I haven't changed much either, he thought wryly. He took a deep breath, looked down at Naruto to strengthen his resolve, and stepped forwards. Rin. He spoke his first word to her in more than a decade. Her face had drained of color and she pressed her lips together in a thin line. You. The word was breathed out barely audible, and Kakashi knew in an instant that the bad blood between them had festered to the point of world-ending hatred. Still, she was his best bet, so he opened his mouth to tell her what he needed, but she shook her head. Not here, she muttered, looking around the semi-crowded emergency room, and stepped backwards. Come on, not here, with all these people. Come through to one of these rooms. Without a word, Kakashi followed her to an examination room, vaguely wondering if she wanted to remove witnesses from fear of embarrassment due to the earth-shattering fight they were due for, or because she was going to attempt to kill him. He shifted his child awkwardly so he had enough of an arm free to reach his weapons, if need be. Rin shut the door of the examination room behind her and turned to the man she had once shared a team with. Silence stretched, long and frigidly cold. Finally, Rin broke it. What do you want? She demanded. Kakashi hesitated for the briefest of instants. "I need your help," he said simply. Rin swelled indignantly, and he hurried to explain before she started her self-righteous "how dare you and who do you think you are" rants. "My son is sick, and he needs help. You're the only person I could think of to help." Rin blinked. "You have a kid?" she demanded, peering for the first time at the child Kakashi was holding. Her eyes widened a fraction as she realized just how old the boy had to be, how young Kakashi would have had to have been when he was born, and then narrowed in disgust. "Where is she, the mother?" the medic demanded. Kakashi didn't blink or flinch. "Dead." "Who?" Now Rin was pulling up a mental list of all potential comrades who had died and wondering which of them had gone to bed with the man before her. "Fune Kita," Kakashi said shortly. "You didn't know her. Did you?" Rin asked shrewdly. Kakashi sighed. "Does that really matter at this point?" he asked, looking down at Naruto in his arms and wondering if he was better taking his chances with a medic that didn't hate him. Love affair or one-night stand or interrogation gone awry, is that really important right now? Rin just stared at him, and Kakashi growled. "Fine," he spat. "I was on a deep cover mission in Kumo, okay? I made a mistake, got involved with a girl. Happy? Please, Rin, he's sick." The medic scoffed, snatching the form he'd filled out in the waiting room out of his hand and turning away, shoulders tense and face angry, but Kakashi relaxed a hair. She hadn't tossed him out, she was going to help. Rin attached the form to a clipboard and began reading through it. Hokage. Naruto. Rin's face twisted in a grimace of distaste and grief for her teacher at the name, and she shot Kakashi a sharp look. If that was meant to be a joke it wasn't, Kakashi snapped. Sensei wanted his son to be named Naruto, in the hopes the kid would be just like his namesake. Seemed like sound reasoning to me. Rin scowled, but accepted that the socially stunted Hokage probably would name his son in such an unusual way and turned back to her chart. 9 years old, allergic to bees. She flicked the top paper up, reading the page beneath. Hasn't had his vaccinations. Guess some things never change. Kakashi let that barb slide for the sake of the boy shivering in his arms. Rin put the chart aside and pulled a penlight out of her doctor coat pocket, flicking it on and shining it into Naruto's blue eyes to test his pupils. Naruto whimpered and hid his face in his father's chest, hiding from the light and the woman who snapped at his dad. Rin was taken aback at the very real pain on Kakashi's hidden face as he rubbed the smaller Hokage's back and murmured softly to him in a way he never would have done as a child. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her voice a fraction gentler than before. Kakashi shook his head. "He was fine this morning. I picked him up from school today, and he was fine then too. But when I called him down to dinner, he was the Jounin broke off, closing his eye and taking a moment to hate himself for not bringing Naruto to the hospital right then. But he seemed alright, just a little fevered. Nara doesn't tend to get sick, at all." "At all?" Rin repeated dubiously. Kakashi nodded curtly. "It's an inheritance of sorts," he replied flatly. The medic still looked skeptical. "You got sick as a kid." "He didn't inherit it from me." That came out more snappishly than he'd intended. To the Hokage's surprise, however, Rin backed off, no doubt assuming that Naruto had some sort of healing Kekii Genkai gained through maternal inheritance. Kakashi took a deep breath and continued. "So it was unusual, but I thought that he was fine. But then he just got worse and worse until by bedtime, he was like this." He gestured the boy huddled in his lap, paler than death and slick with cold sweat, shaking violently despite the heavy blanket coiled around him. Rin frowned, chewing her lip contemplatively. "Let's see what his temperature is," she said, and it was with careful fingers that she turned Naruto's head and slipped a thermometer into his mouth. Instantly, she knew he was far too warm, his heat striking to her fingers. Naruto's face twisted and he spat the thermometer out. "Dad," he whined, eyes squinted shut against the light in the examination room. "Can't we just go home? Please. My head hurts and I feel sick, Naruto." "You feel sick. That's why we're here," Kakashi said softly. "I'm sorry, I know it's uncomfortable being examined, but you have to let Rin-san do it so that she can figure out how to make you better." The blonde whined and squirmed, but let Rin take his temperature. Her brown eyes widened in alarm as she read the result, 42.8. "He's really, really warm. He has a dangerously high fever," she said to the father, instantly switching from slighted friend into much-needed medic and moving to the white starched bed nearby. "Here, lay him down, I'm going to need to examine him properly and I can't do that while you're hiding him." Naruto whimpered and clung, but Kakashi resolutely forced the boy to let go of his shirt and lie on the bed as the medic bent over him, prodding and poking experimentally. Kakashi found himself shunted backwards as Rin became more and more alarmed. Naruto started to cry, and he was pushed out of the room entirely and ordered sternly to go back to the waiting room and wait. 9 years old, Kakashi. Kakashi's head shot up and he was on his feet in an instant, zeroing in on the tired and angry-looking medic who had come for him. "What's wrong with him, Rin?" he demanded. The woman's brown eyes snapped at him in a familiar glistening rage, though it was slightly different in nature this time. She jerked her head to indicate that he should follow and stalked away, hugging the clipboard to her chest. Kakashi hurried after her. She led him to a sterile white room, and Kakashi's breath caught as he spotted Naruto on the bed, looking small and unwell. A drip slowly fed fluid into his arm, and a clip on his finger monitored his heart rate. Someone had tucked Oink into bed with him, and he was curled around the toy like he used to when he was younger. "Is he?" Kakashi couldn't finish the sentence, not even sure what he was asking. Rin shook her head, movements angry. "He's sedated. We had to pack his bed with ice to bring his fever down to a safe level, and he wasn't too happy with us." Kakashi winced a little. He didn't doubt that Naruto had thrown a huge tantrum when he'd been forced into a bed and covered with ice packs. He opened his mouth to apologize, but hesitated when he saw the way Rin was glaring at him, like he was worse than scum, like he was a convicted baby-eater. He glared back challengingly, waiting for the shouting that they were past due for, anyway. But he'd be damned if he was drawn into the screaming before he knew what was wrong with Naruto. Fortunately, Rin was a professional as well. "That boy," she hissed, extending a finger to point at Naruto while keeping her eyes fixed on the father, "is your son. You have a responsibility to look after him, you ass." Kakashi blinked. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded. "What's wrong with him?" You are what's wrong." Rin stepped closer, jabbing her finger into his chest. "You did this to him." Kakashi went cold. His mind froze. "What?" he whispered. She nodded angrily, looking down at the clipboard. "No vaccinations. No checkups. He hasn't seen a GP since he was less than a year old. You and your stupid stubborn ideas have done this. What's wrong with him?" Kakashi demanded. Rin hesitated, her face twisted in anger. "I should go straight to the Hokage and tell him that you're not fit to be a pa dash." Kakashi cut her off by grabbing her arms and slamming her backwards into the wall. Objects on the shelf beside her head shook, and a tube of something fell over and rolled off the edge, falling to the floor and breaking open. "Damn it, woman, tell me what is wrong with my son," he shouted, and was angry enough to miss the flicker of fear that passed over his once teammate's face. After a moment, her own fury was enough to harden her resolve. "Bakiatari sickness." She said the words as if they held the weight of the world. "He's got it." Kakashi's mind stalled, racing to try and place the words. Eventually, he dredged up long-lost memories from his Shotgun Academy experience, a rushed lesson on the terrible disease that had erased entire clans from existence in times before the village had been founded. Bakiatari sickness. Swift, deadly, highly contagious. But no one got it anymore. How? He actually stuttered a little, and panic gripped him. How did he get it? You said, did I give it to him? How? I've never had it. Rin gave him the blackest look that he'd ever seen on her face, and he'd seen a few dark expressions. Of course you've never had it, she snapped. It's very easy to avoid contracting it in today's day and age. She turned to her clipboard and began paging through it, before finding the information she was after and reading it aloud. March 3rd, in the 39th year since Konoha's founding, Hotake Tsukumo took his son for the standard vaccinations received at 3 years of age. Among them was the vaccination for the Bakiatari sickness. You had the vaccination. Your son was never given the same opportunity. This is your fault, Hotake. Kakashi's grip on her arms eased and he stumbled back a step or two, turning to look at the child lying sick in a hospital bed. One hand came up to cover his masked mouth, and he realized for the first time what an oversight it had been to rely on Kyubi for all of the kid's medical needs. Bakiatari sickness was a disease that attacked chakra itself, consuming it until the afflicted person died, organs eventually shutting down and ceasing to function as the person's chakra levels were drained away to nothing. Such a sickness could easily topple even such indestructible forces as Jinchuriki, and had even been used as a biochemical weapon in the First Great Shinobi War. Once it had been treated by administering chakra infusions, but that was an imperfect treatment that provided nothing more than a brief reprieve anyway. There was a vaccination to guard against it, but Kakashi had never taken Naruto to receive it. Kakashi got his own vaccinations in his mandatory yearly physical, and had ever since he was 5 years old. He never thought of things like that, had never had to. But he was a parent. There was a lot of stuff that he hadn't had to think of before Naruto that he thought of, had to think of, every single day. This was his fault, a direct result of a huge oversight on his part. What's happening to him? He managed to force out through a mouth too dry to open properly. Behind him, Rin observed his reaction and felt a bit of her anger drain away. When she spoke, it was clipped and impersonal, but at least not furious anymore. Bakiatari sickness attacks chakra. Naruto-chan appears to have quite a reservoir, so he's quite vulnerable. Which you would know if you'd spent more than 4 months in the academy. Can you help him? Rin was taken aback at how desperate that whisper was, especially in the face of her insult, and her eyes softened a little. He'll be fine. We caught it in time. I have the first dose of medication here. She dug in her white coat pocket and withdrew a syringe half full of a clear liquid. She approached the sedated child's side and reached for the drip, injecting the medicine into the thin tube and turning to squeeze the banana bag to propel it into the boy's bloodstream. He's going to be okay, but this was a damn close call. Bakiatari sickness is enormously fast. If you had left it even until morning, it may well have been too late to save him. She paused, then held out a bit of paper to Kakashi. Sign that. I've scheduled him for all the vaccinations he's missed over the years. I need your okay. The look on her face told him clearly that he would sign his name or have it forged. Kakashi took her pen and scrawled his name down without comment or a hint of fight, then shoved the form back at his once friend and sank down into the chair beside his child's bed. He won't wake, Rin warned him. The man shrugged, eye fixed on Naruto's face. It was quite obvious that he was planning to stay right there, unmovable as stone. She sighed and turned to leave, ready to go back to work. Thanks, Rin. The soft words reached her just as she reached the door, and she paused. For a moment, just a moment, her heart melted and a tiny bit of that warmth she'd once felt for Hotake Kakashi returned. Then she glanced back and saw him, and that horrible mission came flooding back to her, along with all the hopelessness of knowing that no matter how long she held out, no one was coming for her. She swallowed convulsively and raised her chin. "I didn't do it for you," she said icily. "And don't thank me yet, anyway. I'm going to the Hokage as soon as I get off tonight to demand a full investigation into you and your affairs on grounds of suspected neglect. Gods know how else you've failed that boy." With those parting words, she swept from the room. Uchiha Itachi shoved a heavy tarp aside and clambered to sit on the top of the pile of carefully stacked wood that its owner probably thought he'd hidden really well, sighing when he got there. Drawing one knee up to his chest, he wrapped an arm around it and turned already failing eyes east-northeast. Towards home. Below him, his crude and irritating partner made a noise of impatience and kicked the log pile in a poorly fashioned display of false clumsiness. Kazazumi resented having a child as a partner, and made it clear how he felt. It was fair, Itachi allowed, he resented having such a brute as his partner, but Madara had been quite insistent that he obey Pain, and Pain was a sadistic bastard. Itachi had long grown used to such annoyances, though, so the teen didn't let the man disturb him, instead sitting still as the sun went down and Kisame, grumbling and swearing and gnashing his teeth, was left to the labor of making camp and preparing something to eat all on his own. His eyes never left the horizon, as if staring in the direction of Konoha would somehow let him one day go back there. He missed his home. He missed the missions, and his teammates, and even his parents. And oh, he missed his little brother. Sasuke would be 11 now. Officially a preteen. Itachi hoped he was happier, or at least mentally more stable than the elder brother had been at that same age. Overcome with nostalgia, Itachi rested his cheek on his knee and closed his eyes for a long moment. The missing Nin was older too, time sparing no man. He'd recently turned 16, sweet 16, Kisame had mocked him, the bastard, and had shot upwards in height in the 3 years since he'd left Konoha. His features had become more refined, his face elongating to its adult proportions already. Not that he ever really noticed, or cared. Things had been eventful since his defection, to say the least. Since joining Akatsuki, he'd done basically nothing of consequence. He'd been assigned to watch for the Kyuubi. It has to re-emerge eventually, it's in the fox's nature. Though it might not turn back up again for 50 or so years. As previously stated, Pain was sadistic. But Itachi knew better than to refuse to at least do a token search for the creature. The Uchiha shivered a little as he thought about the run-in he'd had as a 14-year-old with Orochimaru, the last time he'd taken his assignment as an excuse to hang around the Akatsuki's base when Kisame went out on another search for his assigned tailed demon. The creep had ambushed him in an empty corridor and spouted some gibberish that Itachi hadn't actually computed, brain stalling at the hand that had found its way to the small of his back. Within a few moments, Itachi was stalking alone and unharmed out of that corridor, having thoroughly disabused the snake bastard pedophile of the notion that young and pretty automatically equated to easy prey. Not long after, the man had decided that his life was taking him in new directions and left the organization. Itachi vaguely wondered if the man would still flinch every time he laid eyes on him even now, 2 years later. Below his dangling foot, Kisame had finally started up a fire and was loading it with heavier wood to beef it up before the flames ate through the thin sticks he'd been using to bring the sparks to life. Itachi shifted, lifted a bit of wood from the pile he'd made his seat that was digging uncomfortably into his tailbone and tossed it with perfect accuracy into the center of the fire. A cloud of sparks and smoke flew up into Kisame's face, and the bigger man shouted expletives. Itachi smirked. Where the devil was the Kyuubi, anyway? Its host had died, so it vanished. It was either dead, in which case Itachi was wasting his last few years of life on a pointless quest, or had disappeared to a different plane of existence like a summon animal, in which case it was gathering its strength to prepare for a giant comeback, and Itachi was wasting the last few years of his life searching for a way to have a front row seat when the apocalyptic rebirth did happen and probably cut his time even shorter. Ugh, Itachi thought, swinging his folded leg so that he was straddling the pile rather than sitting on it and leaning forward so he was lying belly down, toes pointing at the forest floor. I kinda hope Sasuke just hurries up and kills me already. This sucks. A suspicious trumpeting noise sounded from Kisame's pants, and Itachi wrinkled his nose. Ick. Any time, Sasuke. Really? In the meantime, maybe I'll teach my partner the basics of social niceties. He dug around and came up with a handful of pointy objects in several forms. He smirked again. That idea has merit. A second later, a howl of pain split the air. A furious fight soon ensued. Itachi won. They're gonna take Naruto-chan. The hysterical cry burst from Kurenai's lips almost before she was through the door to Asuma's large apartment. The conversation inside cut off like someone switching off a radio. What? Three voices shouted back in incredulous unison. Anko and Ginma were playing a three-way game of Go Fish with Asuma. It was only the four of them gathering today. Guy was on a mission. Yugugo had been confined to ANBU headquarters following an epic argument with her superiors that had resulted in the quiet woman lobbing rocks at her squad leader's head, and Hay-8 was bedbound, defeated by a nasty version of the flu he perpetually sported. Sit down, Kurenai, and explain, Asuma ordered quickly, clearing a spot on the couch for her. She sat, picking up a pillow and hugging it to her chest. They're saying that the Hokage is gonna take Naruto-chan off Kakashi. Apparently Naruto-chan is in the hospital, and there's rumors that there was foul play involved. No way. Ginma's voice was dead set sure, and he put his cards down carefully. No fucking fei. Kakashi would never hurt his kid. Nah. Fucking fei? Anko echoed, amusement in her voice. She dismissed the claim as preposterous as well. Seriously? What are you, 8? Ginma colored. Shut up. Kotetsu-san, he was guarding the Hokage's office door today. He told me that there's a claim of neglect, Kurenai said in a low voice. Asuma frowned, a sudden, tiny doubt rearing its ugly head in his mind. He forced it down. I find it hard to believe that Kakashi would mistreat Naruto in any way, Ginma said, ignoring how Anko was still sniggering at his aborted cussing. Anko nodded happily, peeking at his abandoned hand of cards. Kurenai looked like she was about to cry, disbelieving at how uncaring her friends were of the situation. Asuma noticed and winced a little, putting a cautious arm around the shoulders of his crush. What happened, Kurenai? He asked. Her red eyes looked up at him thankfully, and Asuma's heart flopped just a little. Naruto-chan's sick in the hospital. When I was dropping off my mission report, Dr. Tamanaka came storming through like a thundercloud and demanded to see the Hokage. Kotetsu heard some of it, and he said that she was really mad because she was Naruto-chan's doctor, and he was in the hospital because of Kakashi's negligence. Kurenai's voice had risen to a distressed squeak by the end of that speech, but attention was taken from it by the way Ginma started choking on his beer after the word doctor. Tamanaka, he echoed, bent double, holding a hand over his mouth to cough into and looking up with watering eyes. Anko banged him on the back. Tamanaka, as in Tamanaka-rin? Brown hair? Rectangles, purple tattoos on her cheeks? Yeah. Kurenai said slowly. Ginma stared at her in some kind of horror. I did not know she was back in town, he exclaimed. This is bad, guys. Real bad. What? Asked Asuma. Ginma gave him a scorching look. Come on, Asuma, you knew her too. She was in your class at the academy, remember? I'm the oldest of all of you, I should be the one confused here. Asuma frowned and exchanged confused looks with the girls. Yeah, I remember a Rin in my class, he said slowly. What does that have to do with dash? Am I the only one who sees the significance? Ginma tossed himself back and covered his eyes with his hands in mock despair. Tamanaka Rin was on Kakashi's genin team, or, he was already a chunin, but she was a genin. She and Kakashi had a huge falling out, like, a decade ago, and haven't spoken to each other since. She hates his guts. More than anything. Suddenly, the relevant memories came rushing back to Asuma, and he shot upright, nearly pulling Kurenai over on the way. He remembered the little girl Rin with short brown hair and those odd tattoos, remembered working a few missions with her as a genin and then chunin during the war, and remembered her goodbye party when she was put on placement out of town. In fairness, Asuma had had little to do with her and much more to do with Uchiha Obito, who had been on the same squad. It was through Obito that Asuma had met Kakashi. "Shit," he said as matter-of-factly as he was able. Genma nodded grimly at him, and Anko, the youngest of the group, frowned. "I don't remember her," she said bluntly. "But I spent a long time out of the village as a kid." "Is she really that angry, though? To take Kakashi's kid away, I mean." "I don't think it would be so much pettiness," Kurenai said softly. She too now remembered why the doctor was significant. "It's just. Rin-san saw Kakashi at his worst moments, then left for a long time and never saw him get better, or had a chance to be reminded of his better qualities. I didn't know that they had a fight, but if they did, it would have been huge, and those wounds fester, you know? Especially if she was once fond of him." Anko sneered. "Yeah, imagine that," she spat. "Girl has a crush, fights with crush, runs away like a coward for 12 years, comes back and finds that crush has moved on and now has a family, proceeds to destroy that family out of spite." "Be kind, Anko," Genma scolded lightly. "Rin wouldn't do that." "I think what Kurenai meant to say was that she's making assumptions and decisions based on the person Kakashi was more than a decade ago. And really, would any of us have trusted Kakashi with a kid if he was still as he was back then? Remember what we all thought when he came home with Naruto-chan in the first place?" The group exchanged guilty looks. It was true, they'd all individually and as a collective been fearful that iron-hided, stone-hearted Kakashi would be completely incapable of caring for a child. Of course, he'd proven them all wrong spectacularly, and there wasn't one among them that wouldn't fight for Kakashi's right to keep the kid. Asuma realized with a jolt that this was exactly the sort of situation that he had inwardly resolved to help with a little under a year ago, that day he had caught Kakashi with his ANBU gear. "We have to help," he said decisively, putting aside the tiny, damning fear that Kakashi was indeed slipping bit by bit. "We can't let them take Naruto-chan. It would destroy them both." "We don't even know what happened," Anko said reasonably, digging around in a takeout box for another stick of dango. "I mean, the Hokage is probably not gonna do anything. He'll have to investigate if the doc tells him she thinks something's up, but he'll find nothing, and do nothing. I really doubt there's any reason he'd take Naruto-chan away." "But even the investigation is crippling, Anko," Kurenai argued. "Just the fact that it happens implies a need for it to happen and puts black marks on his permanent record that'll never be erased." Asuma nodded grimly. "Add to that Kakashi's age, marital status and family history, and you have a recipe for disaster. One tiny mistake is all they'd need to find, a single missed meal, an afternoon when Naruto-chan was unsupervised, an injury caused by an accident that happened when Kakashi wasn't in the room, anything, to have a case for neglect. And Kakashi has a lot of enemies in high places who would love to do just that. This is a big problem." "I vote we tell Guy," Anko said wryly. "He'd go charging straight up to the hospital and start ranting about Kakashi and youth and springtime and green spandex and damn well intimidate the lady doctor into dropping the matter." A bit of breathless laughter was her reply, and she smirked, pleased with herself for lightening the mood just a little. "We have to tell him, and Hayate and Yugugo," Kurenai said softly. "Otherwise they'll be cross. Maybe Yugugo can spread some rumors in ANBU, get some of Kakashi's old teammates to come forwards and speak for him." "That's a great idea," Asuma agreed, rubbing a hand through his hair and digging around for a cigarette in his pocket. He lit it up quickly, taking a much-needed draw of nicotine-laden smoke. "I'm slated to start another rotation in the academy tomorrow. I can talk to the teachers, maybe some parents." See if I can round up some support from that front. Every jounin had to do a certain number of hours of teaching work each year if they weren't the sensei of a genin team. This could be logged as time training chunin, tutoring genin, academy or pre-academy students to get them up to scratch, helping rookie ANBU, many of whom were only chunin level when recruited, or even working in the daycare where shinobi left their children during missions. The easiest way, though, was simply to apply for a few weeks' stint at the academy. Asuma was coming up on his turn to work at the school, and had been dreading it, but it seemed it could work to his advantage. Great! Genma said brightly, pleased with the solution. You should talk to your father, too, Asuma. He should listen to the opinion of someone so close to Kakashi. I'll put my nose to the ground and see if I can come up with some other people of our senseis or parents' generations to speak on Kakashi's behalf. Kurenai hummed, thinking over what strings she could pull. Her parents were well liked, with many friends in both the civilian and shinobi worlds, so she could well offer a range of support from the civilian community within Konoha. And, hey, isn't Kakashi friends with Hyuga Hayashi? She asked suddenly. There was a pause. He is? Enko said blankly. Since when? Kurenai frowned. I don't know. I've just seen them together, and Hyuga Ryu, a branch member about as old as Mom, she said that the Hatake family were invited to dinner fairly frequently. That could certainly help, Asuma agreed, having been raised in the center of village politics and having a very keen understanding of how they worked. The Hyuga clan were well respected. If Hayashi, middle-aged head of the Hyuga clan, spoke for Kakashi, then his word would carry far more weight than a civilian-born medic in her 20s who had lived out of village for her entire adult life. The group sat there in Asuma's living room for a very long time, cards forgotten, coming up with an extensive plan to rescue their friend's family insanity in one fell swoop, so long, in fact, that Guy came to find them after his mission and was included in the plotting. By the time they split up and went their own ways, each was quietly aware that this was not the first time that Kakashi had needed help, would not be the last, and that each of them willingly, gladly was taking up the mantle of friend and protector to the man and his child, whether Kakashi agreed to it or not. Kiba was feeling a horrible dread coiling slowly in his stomach as the day progressed. He felt like he was going to throw up all over his exam paper. He was going to do it. He just knew it. He was in the midst of the first of 3 graduation exams that were offered in the last 18 months of the academy. Potential graduates had 3 chances, 3 exams, to show off their skills. They had to pass at least 1, preferably 2 of these exams to avoid repeating their final year. Everyone had been really nervous about the exams, desperate to do well right off the bat. Naruto wasn't there. And Kiba was afraid that it was his fault. 4 days ago, everything had been normal. Sure, Naruto had been a little quieter than his average, but he had days when that happened, so Kiba hadn't thought much of it. The Inuzuka was in a hurry to get home after school, because his sister had made a huge chocolate cake yesterday and had promised to ice it while he was at school and let him have a bit when he got home that day. So he didn't stay with Naruto until the kid's father had turned up, and had barely thought to offer for him to come to the Inuzuka compound with Kiba. Naruto was 9, Kiba had reckoned when Naruto had asked to wait for his father for a little while longer, so he'd be fine by himself until Kakashi-san turned up. So he'd shouted goodbye and left at a run, deaf to Naruto's protests. Naruto wasn't at school the next day. Kiba had noticed, and felt vaguely uneasy, but brushed the feeling aside. Naruto was out of school as often as he was in it, with no warning. His dad probably took him on another trip. But then the next day, another day with no Naruto, Kiba had spotted Kakashi-san, looking pinched and worn and worried, talking to a grim-faced Irika-sensei after school, and his heart had frozen over in terror. What if Naruto was missing? What if someone had come and taken him from school, all because Kiba was too impatient to stay with him for a few minutes? He remembered overhearing his mother ranting about Naruto being abducted once already, which was why he was allowed to have live kunai on him all the time in school now. What if it happened again? What if someone had Naruto? What if they'd hurt him? What if he was dead? What if it was all Kiba's fault? Akamaru whined anxiously at him, and Kiba looked down at the tiny puppy. I know, boy, but what am I supposed to do? He whispered desperately. Iruka-sensei obviously heard, because his head rose and his eyes locked on the Inuzuka. Kiba-kun, please stay quiet, he called mildly. Test conditions, no talking. Despite the fact that the words were barely a rebuke, they triggered something that had not happened, especially in public, for many years. Kiba began to cry. Iruka's eyes widened. That was not the normal reaction of anyone being reminded they were working a test, and he quickly made his way to the boy's desk. Hey, what's wrong? He said, voice low to match the near-silent sobs racking the little boy's frame. With someone as small as Naruto in the class, it was easy to forget that this outgoing child was still very young as well. The teacher glanced at the test paper, only a couple of answers were scratched in, the rest glaringly blank. Are you having trouble? Don't worry, Kiba-kun. Take a deep breath. You're a good student, okay? You can do this. Kiba shook his head, tears streaming down his face, and pointed at Naruto's empty chair. It's my fault, he half-wailed. Other students were looking up from their own tests, curious. Iruka glanced around and winced a little. Mizuki-sensei, he said to get the assistant's attention. When the silver-haired man looked up, Iruka gestured at the sobbing Kiba and then nodded at the door. Mizuki understood and nodded back, settling differently in his chair to watch the students more carefully, ready to supervise. Meanwhile, Iruka put a hand on Kiba's shoulder, gently but firmly insisting that the boy move. Come on, Kiba, let's go outside and talk about this. Up you get, good boy. We don't want to disturb the others from their test. The quiet monologue coaxed Kiba out the door, which Iruka shut behind them. He heard Mizuki say a harsh, get back to your tests, kids. Chuji. Put that cookie down and do your test, but ignored the dispute, trusting the other teacher to handle the class for a time. Iruka steered his weeping charge down the corridor and into the teacher's lounge, which was empty for once. Okay. He knelt in front of Kiba. Tell me what's wrong. What's your fault? Kiba's brown eyes looked at him fearfully, his lower lip trembling. I'm sorry, he wailed. I'm sorry, I should have waited but I didn't and now he's gone and I'm sorry. Whoa, Iruka spoke over the noise. Tell me what happened. Gradually, in bits and pieces interspersed by tears, the teacher got the full story. Iruka had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from lashing out with angry words upon finding out that Kiba had left the Hatake child alone. Iruka himself had left early that day to get to an appointment on time, and hadn't seen the children off safely, so most of the shocked anger was at himself anyway, and Kakashi-san would kill him if this got out. Taking a deep breath, the teacher put aside the irrational fear and anger, and sat down on one of the couches in the staff room, gesturing for Kiba to sit next to him. Kiba-kun, he began, choosing his words carefully, Naruto-kun is not missing. He is in the hospital. Kiba gasped in horror, wide-eyed and terrified, almost convinced that he was going to be arrested or at the very least exiled for his heinous crime of leaving Naruto in the academy school grounds after school finished. Iruka recognized, and had to swallow a smile. He became ill, and his father took him there in the middle of the night following the last day he was in school. This wasn't your fault. He contracted a sickness that got very bad very quickly, but he's going to be fine, just fine. He'll be back before you know it. Here. He offered a box of tissues. Kiba took 3, and set about mopping up his face. Is he really okay? He half-whispered. Iruka hesitated, then simply nodded rather than going into specifics with the boy. He will be, he agreed. Can I visit him? The Inuzuka blurted. His teacher winced just slightly. Naruto was infected with an often deadly, highly contagious disease, and used the ultimate in adult deflections, you'd have to ask your mother. Are you okay now? Kiba nodded, still sniffling a little but well on his way back to composed. Iruka sat there with him for a little longer until the child was calm, then led him to the bathroom to wash his face off, and back to his waiting exam. Mizuki looked in askance at him as he settled beside his co-teacher at the front of the room, and Iruka rolled his eyes. Children are so dramatic, he whispered to his partner. Mizuki laughed quietly in agreement. Inazuka Tsum was glaring at her daughter's favorite blouse, which she had accidentally put a hole in with a bit of overvigorous hand-washing. What kind of shirt is hand-wash only in this day and age? She demanded of the garment. It didn't respond, or magically mend itself. Tsum growled low in her throat and glared some more, redirecting the look to her familiar when the big dog chuckled. You be quiet. You should have let Seiji-chan do your laundry, Tsum, he replied chidingly. You're not cut out for housework. It's time to face it. Your elder brother is better at it than you are. I don't need help to run my own household. Tsum shouted, then looked at the shirt again. I just need to mend this before Hana gets home. Easy. Koromaru blanched. Please don't try to sew. Please. Give it to your cousin. Please, Tsum. Tsum studiously ignored the canine, threading a needle carefully and holding up the shirt again, unsure where to begin. The watching dog cringed in anticipation of the mangled mess that Hana's shirt was soon to become. Where did you even find a sewing needle? He demanded. It was stuck between the couch cushions, Tsum said with a touch of pride. Koromaru groaned. Seiji-chan is good with repairs, he said hopefully. She can fix things like you'll never know they were torn. Tsum opened her mouth to snarl at the animal something to the tune of, I can clothe my own kids, damn it, but shut it again when a soft knock on the door interrupted her. Enter, she said, curious. She wasn't expecting visitors, and anyone in her clan would bounce in without knocking. The door opened, and Tsum just about had a heart attack when it revealed the knocker to be none other than Hyuga's very own clan head, Hayashi, the king of protocol and manners and not turning up without warning or invitation and sticks up arses. Hayashi? Who's dead? She blurted, jumping to her feet in alarm. The Hyuga looked grim, but smirked a tiny bit at her reaction. No one, he said evenly. I apologize for coming over unannounced like this, but a matter has been brought to my attention that needs instant response, and I was hoping that you might be able to help me with it. Tsum blinked. That was something that she'd never thought she would hear out of the stone-cold Hyuga's lips. You. Feeling all right, Hayashi? The man gave her a wry look, and she grinned. Sure, I'll help. What's the problem? Must be important. Hayashi nodded, a single slash of his head, and gestured for Tsum to follow. She stood and held the blouse out to Koromaru. Take that to Seiji-chan, ask her to mend it, she ordered. Koromaru wisely obeyed without comment. I have heard rumors that I feel are based rather solidly in fact, and I fear I may need your assistance in diverting what could be a domino effect that could have devastating consequences. Now Tsum was getting concerned as she followed the Hyuga out of her home and clan's complex, into the village proper. They appeared to be headed for the Hokage Tower. What's up? Do you recall a young medic by the name of Tamanaka Rin? Hayashi inquired. Tsum thought on the name, searching memory banks and coming up empty. Nope, she said, shaking her head. Should I? Hayashi's lips curved in a cultured smile. Hardly. I couldn't place the name either until I searched for her personnel file. Her sealed, confidential personnel file, Tsum added. Hayashi waved a hand, dismissing the technicality. Just so. It seems that she has a grudge against Hataki-san. Hayashi paused and turned back as Tsum stopped dead, falling behind. Problem? Naruto, she said. This is about Naruto? Hayashi tilted his head. It's about Kakashi-san. But Rin has accused him of neglecting Naruto-kun, yes. I need you to come and stand beside me while I explain to the Hokage how ludicrous the claim is, and persuade him not to investigate the matter. Some nodded, and they kept moving together through the crowded streets. Hayashi spoke quickly as they wove through people in the shopping district, filling the Inuzuka in on the situation as he understood it. Some was horrified. She had, of course, heard that Naruto was ill, and had even gone so far as to send Kakashi a meal or two to carry him through the trial that was a hospitalized child, but to be accused of neglect? Cold fingers wrapped themselves around her heart as she thought of what an investigation would result in, and she took a moment to truly hate the iron-fisted militant rule they lived under that would confiscate Kakashi's most precious person like stolen goods. Then she felt horror wash over her as she contemplated the bloodbath that would be Kakashi's reaction to someone attempting to forcibly take his child. It would be a massacre, and Kakashi would be killed at the end of it all, and Naruto would still be without him. So, as you are no doubt aware, I was hoping to use our joint influence to forestall or stop the investigation before it is ordered, Hayashi wrapped up. I understand you are fond of Kakashi-san. I am aware that you have offered aid often over the last 9 years. Some snorted and nodded. Yeah. Kid needed a bit of a hand along the line, you know? Needed a mum, actually. Ridiculous, right? But I had time, and money enough not to miss a donated meal or some clothing or some manual labor here and there. A nasty thought occurred to her and she narrowed her eyes at her companion. But what about you? Why do you care? You're not the sort to do this out the goodness of your heart. What's your angle? What do you get from speaking for him like this? Hayashi stopped dead and turned to face her. Some was taken aback by the cold anger lighting up his eyes. Hatake Kakashi is the only man in this entire village who has the slightest idea of the challenges my family has faced, he snarled. We are more alike than I care to examine, and a shared interest in keeping our children safe from Kumo is the least of it. He is my strongest supporter, my most outspoken advocate in my vendetta against that accursed place, and I am his. I will not stand by and watch yet another party attempt to steal his child. Not so long as you need him, Some said shrewdly. Hayashi snorted. You think little of me, Inuzuka-san. That is your business. All that you should concern yourself with, however, is that at this time I have nothing but the best of intentions for both the Hatake children. He spun and stalked off, resuming his path towards the Hokage's dwelling. Some winced behind him and hurried to catch up. Ma, Kakashi is young, she said when she was once again level with Hayashi, her voice and mood having swung back from anger and into goodwill. Barely 25, just a baby, really. Poor kid. He's had rotten luck with that brat of his from day one. So you intend to speak with me on his behalf? Hayashi's monotone was back. Some glared at him and jabbed him in the side with her finger, causing him to squeak in a most un-Hayashi-like manner and jump about a foot before turning and glaring at her. Just try and stop me, Hyuga, she said stoutly, stamping ahead and leaving Hayashi staring at her back in disbelief at her childishness. The incredulousness only increased when she gave a shout and veered off course, dodging into a restaurant as she passed by the door. Hayashi followed, ducking his head under the flaps of material hanging at head height in the otherwise empty doorway to look for whatever it was that had sidetracked Sum so completely. She had stopped beside a gathering of 4 men who appeared to be sharing a meal. Yamanaka Inoichi, Akamichi Chuza, Aburame Shibi, and Nara Shikaku were gathered around the table, all of them partway through a meal and all of them looking up at Sum in surprise. Fall in line, boys, the wild woman was saying, hands on her hips. I'm in need of your muscle. Just stand there, look intimidating and don't talk. Come on. Hayashi was expecting haughty refusals, heavens knew he'd respond that way, but was surprised when the 4 clan heads merely stood quietly, Chuza lifting a rice ball to take along with him and Inoichi throwing a cheeky salute at Tsum along with a "Yes, ma'am." Shikaku dragged his feet and moaned about how troublesome the whole ordeal was, but didn't make any move to stay and finish eating, and Shibi just fell silently in line, content to do as he was told. It was surreal to Hayashi, but not an altogether unfortunate turn of events. Their presence would be a great advantage in the negotiations to come. No one spoke as they made their collective way to the Hokage Tower. The newcomers didn't even question where they were going. Hayashi explained their mission briefly to the secretarial staff at the base of the Hokage Tower, and they were informed that Sarutobi was meeting with Tamanaka at that very moment. Perfect timing, Tsum grinned, all fong, and led the way to the office. "Tsum-san," Hayashi said as they drew near. "Please allow me to do the talking on this occasion. I feel I am better suited to your show." "Fine," Tsum interrupted, shoving the Chunin guard aside and opening the Hokage's door. Inside, the Hokage was gravely listening to a young woman. Tsum rightly assumed her to be Dr. Tamanaka. The Inuzuka felt a growl begin in the back of her throat at the sight of the little upstart who was making waves. "I first came here 2 days ago, Hokage-sama. Why haven't you ordered an inquiry yet?" Tamanaka was saying. "Rin-san," the Hokage replied, "I was rather hoping to wait a little, and let all parties calm down. I know there is tension between yourself and Kakashi-san, so maybe it would be best to start this off unofficially." "I know what I know, Hokage-sama, and I really think Rin began to reply heatedly, but Tsum chose that moment to draw attention to her presence. "Oh, come on, Hokage-sama," she scoffed, striding forwards. "The kid got the sniffles, that is not a case for neglect. If it was, there'd be no parent anywhere allowed to keep their kids. Hell, mine been sick more often than I can count." Hayashi gave her a look, and she sighed and nodded, consenting to be quiet and let the diplomatic Hyuga talk his way around this. "Hello, Tsum-san," Sarutobi said, sounding surprised and more than a little amused. "Hayashi-san, Inoichi-san, Chuza-san, Shibi-san, Shikaku-san. The problem is not that he got the sniffles," Rin snapped, ire raised, ignoring the greetings and speaking directly to Tsum. "He caught a rare and often deadly, not to mention highly contagious disease, as a direct result of his father neglecting to get him his vaccinations." The gathering of middle-aged shinobi were quiet after the outburst, causing the anger in Rin's voice to fall oddly flat in the echoing silence that followed. After a reasonable pause, Hayashi cleared his throat and spoke softly. "Can you prove that the child only contracted the Bakiatari sickness as a direct result of the absence of vaccinations?" he asked quietly. The young woman stared at him. "The vaccination safeguards against contracting the disease," she half-shouted. "Always?" Hayashi returned, his voice becoming quieter as Rin's got louder. "There is never a case where a vaccinated person has contracted the illness that he or she has been vaccinated against." Color clouded Rin's cheeks, and she looked away. "Sometimes, after several decades, people can contract diseases they have been vaccinated against," she admitted. Hayashi nodded patiently. "And did the fact that Kakashi-san did not vaccinate Naruto-kun guarantee that he would contract the Bakiatari sickness?" "Well, of course not, but it highly increased the chances from what to what, exactly? 1 in 100 to 2 in 100? To 10 in 100? What are the chances of catching Bakiatari sickness here, in Konoha?" "Practically nothing, but practically nothing, especially when one factors is Naruto-kun's preternatural ability to remain healthy, yes? It's true that Hatake Naruto-kun allegedly never gets sick, but and when he noticed that Naruto-kun was ill, Kakashi-san took him straight to the hospital, to the care of a medic he knew would be able to recognize and treat the illness, despite it being the middle of the night. In fact, he acted within an ideal timeframe, was an excellent example of how one should react when faced with such a situation, correct?" Idly, Tsum wondered how Hayashi had gotten that information, or if he was just making a series of educated guesses based on what he knew of Kakashi and Kakashi's mother-hen tendencies. Rin looked frustrated. Well, he did, but so, to summarize, Hayashi interrupted ruthlessly, Kakashi-san chose to forego a medical procedure that may not have worked and may have been unnecessary anyway due to Naruto-kun's maternal inheritance, an action which only marginally increased Naruto-kun's chances of contracting the illness, and acted in a responsible and timely manner upon finding his child to be ill. This is the evidence that Tamanaka-san wishes to present to Hokage-sama as reason for a full inquiry into the Hatake family, under suspicion of neglect. Finally, Hayashi turned back to the Hokage. Honestly, Hokage-sama, do I really need to explain why Inuzuka-sama, Yamanaka-sama, Aburame-sama, Nara-sama, Akamichi-sama and myself are protesting this claim? The Hokage sighed and looked past the Hyuga to Rin. He does have a point, Rin-san, he said, spreading his hands. Do you have anything to add? Rin made a frustrated noise. Sir, she protested, it's not as simple as Hyuga-sama makes out. I'm sure the vaccinations are just the tip of the iceberg, and everyone knows that Kakashi is not a suitable person for a parent. He's just not. Oh, well then, some spoke up again, unable to keep quiet. Forgive us if we don't convict Hatake on the overwhelming evidence that everyone knows it's true. There is actually a great amount of evidence to contradict that statement, anyway, Hayashi pointed out softly. Given an entire council of the clan stands before you, advocating Kakashi-san's innocence and worth as a parent. Sarutobi held up his hands. Enough, he said. Turning to Rin he said, Rin-san, I understand your concern. It does seem that Kakashi has made a grave error in neglecting to procure proper medical upkeep for his son. However, he paused for a long moment, glancing at the gathered clan heads. Hyuga-san does have a point. Given the circumstances, especially given Kakashi-san's track record with regards to Naruto-kun, no vaccinations just doesn't constitute a case for neglect. I understand that you have concerns, but unless you can provide real medical evidence that any kind of abuse has taken place, I don't see the reason to order a full investigation. You can't be serious. Rin exclaimed. Hokage-sama, Kakashi is bad news. You shut your mouth girl, growled Tsum, cutting off the accusations as a surge of anger hit and stepping forwards aggressively. I've watched that boy since he first came home with that baby, and he's done nothing but his best for the brat. And here you come waltzing back to the village thinking you know him better than anyone. I got news for you, he grew up. He changed. He loves that kid more than the air he breathes, and if you think you're gonna take that away from him Tsum-san, Hayashi intervened, laying a hand on his comrade's shoulder. Calm yourself. The Hokage has made his decision. Tamanaka-san's words are now just the senseless raging of a jilted woman. Do not concern yourself too much with them. Rin's face colored and her mouth twisted with anger, but she didn't speak. Hayashi nodded at her in mocking farewell and herded his group out the door and back to street level, sensing that the best thing to do now was to retreat before the doctor could actually gather herself enough to form a proper argument. Well, that was interesting, Inoichi said mildly as they stepped back out to the bright sunlight. Tsum shot him a sharp-toothed grin. Thanks, guys. Good job. Y'all did just like you were told. You did good, all intimidatin' and supportive-like and silent. Ma, troublesome, complained Shikaku, raking fingers through his hair and looking up at the sun. You made me late, Tsum. How am I gonna explain this to my wife? Don't be a drama queen, Inoichi grinned. Glad I could help, Chuza said to Tsum with a gentle smile. What a silly reason to justify taking someone's child away. My Chuji has nothing but good things to say about little Naruto-chan, the boy couldn't be being abused. It's not possible. Be careful, Shibi intoned from behind his high collar and sunglasses. Shino tells me the child becomes quite distressed if one uses chan as a suffix connected to his name. Some laughed. Well, what he don't know won't hurt the runt. I gotta go, stuff to do. Thanks fair comin', men. Hayashi, good catch there. She took off, leaving a confused-looking Hyuga in her wake. He turned to his fellow clan heads for help. Inoichi grinned at him. She means spotting the whole investigating neglect thing. Well done. One by one, the others all congratulated him, even Shikaku dredged up a troublesome that sounded vaguely appraising. Hayashi was left with the peculiar feeling of not only being one of a group, but being accepted and liked within that group. He found that he liked the feeling. Rin. Wait up. Surprised, Rin turned. She was shocked when she saw that it was her once teammate who had called after her. She was all but at the village gates, leaving for another placement at another tiny outpost for another 5 years. No one had come to see her off, and she had told no one that she was leaving. And yet there was Kakashi, moving quickly to catch up, hand in hand with the small blonde child that Rin despaired of him having. What? She asked tiredly, bracing herself for anger, for the spitting rage that she was sure would pour onto her from Kakashi. Heavens knew he had a temper, and didn't let things go. How angry had he been at Obito over every tiny slight? And hers was a huge one, she'd be lucky to leave unscathed, really. So she closed her eyes and waited for the first blow. I meant to be waiting for you at the gate, came Kakashi's voice, actually sounding apologetic. But, well, I ran late. Rin's eyes flew open and she stared at the man in surprise. His hand was rubbing the back of his head and his face was crinkled in an awkward smile the likes of which Rin wouldn't have thought him capable of creating. What do you want, Kakashi? She asked tiredly. Kakashi dropped his hand and looked at her. You were leaving again. Without saying goodbye. Again. The words weren't accusatory, but Rin bristled anyway. I wouldn't have thought you'd care, she spat. You hate goodbyes. Kakashi nodded, and again Rin was taken aback and the ease in the motion, the gentleness that she hadn't seen before. She wondered wildly if this was even Kakashi, or if someone was teasing her with a henge. I wanted to say thanks. For helping Narupup. And I guess I should introduce you properly, eh? Again, that awkward smile turned up, and Rin just stared, beyond words. Kakashi pulled on the hand still holding his child's, drawing Naruto in front of him. Rin, this is my son Naruto. Naruto, this is Dr. Tamanaka Rin. She was on my genin team when I was your age, and she was the doctor who looked after you in the hospital. The little boy, who looked achingly familiar in a way that Rin couldn't place, smiled up at her happily. Thanks for lookin' after me, Dr. Rin, he said sunnily. I feel loads better now. I'm glad, Naruto-kun, Rin said faintly, seeing that she had to say something. Kakashi dropped Naruto's hand and bent forwards to murmur something in his ear, and Naruto nodded and wandered away, finding a nearby tree and proceeding to scale it. Kakashi had clearly told him something to the tune of, don't wander far, but you can play if you want. Well, you win, Rin said a touch bitterly as she watched the child and ruefully admitted, in her own mind, to herself and herself alone, that Naruto didn't appear to be at all cowed or wanting. I suppose you've come to tell me I told you so. Nah. 10 years ago, you'd been right on the money, Kakashi said easily, sticking his hands in his pockets. Rin stared. Where was her stiff, proper, punctual teammate? What had happened to him? Could people really change so completely? Well, I have to go. Bye. Retreat, that was all she could do. Before he hurt her again, before he realized that despite 10 years of building defenses designed to keep him out, he was so very able to hurt her deeply with a word, a look, a gesture. She turned and all but fled. Rin. As if the word had been a net that caught and held her, Rin stopped, but she didn't turn back. She tensed, waiting for the attack, but Kakashi's next words caught her totally off guard. I am sorry. The woman drew in a quick gasp of air, then gathered herself and half-turned, taking in the man standing there looking truly repentant and not in the least like he was mocking her. Something softened inside her for once at the sight. "I know," she said, and meant it. She struggled with the idea of forgiveness, but found she couldn't, not just yet. But perhaps soon, given time to let out the badness that had festered in that horrible wound she had worn on her heart like a shield. Kakashi bowed his head, as if he had read her thoughts and accepted her answer. "Hey," Rin found herself saying, and hesitated again when her teammate's soul eye locked on her. "If you're ever in town." She began, then shrugged. "Look me up." It was Kakashi's turn to blink in surprise, but he recovered quickly, and for the first time in 11 years, the pair shared a smile. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe for more content. Support the original author by clicking their profile link in the pinned comment of the first video of this series. They deserve the love. Want early access and exclusive content? Join my Patreon community, link below. Your support fuels these videos. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and I'll catch you in the next video. Stay entertained, stay safe.